Before the widespread message of trauma, attachment styles, and every other psychology term that has spread into the mainstream in the past decade, therapy has advanced a lot in the past few decades. In fact, it's only been in the past 50 years where people were really given the power to not be blamed for all their problems. Back then, and before antidepressants, if you had symptoms of something that didn't conform to the mainstream society, there were crazy solutions that were agreed upon. In the early 1900s, instead of the therapy we have today, it was the exclusive realm of Freudian psychoanalysis, a process where an expert interpreted the hidden conflicts of a broken psyche. Whatever they came up with was the final say, because they knew better than the patient did. Therapy was rare, stigmatized, and only for the deeply troubled. For the most part, people would shrug off their issues, and the explanation was fixed by catering to what society told you to do: touch grass, go outside, and hang out with friends. Things finally turned around in the 60s and 70s with what was called humanistic psychology. Pioneers like Carl Rogers flipped the script entirely. Suddenly, the client wasn't a problem to be fixed, but a person with inherent potential for growth. Therapy became a conversation, a relationship built on empathy and acceptance that went in both directions. Now, this might sound very obvious to us now today, but back then it completely shifted the narrative. Books, talk shows, and eventually the internet transformed therapy from a clinical secret into a mainstream tool for self-improvement. The focus shifted from "what's wrong with you" to "what do you need to thrive?" And as corny as this may seem, it did change how we saw mental health completely. But like many good things taken too far, the widespread adoption of therapeutic language has had some unintended consequences. What started as tools for healing have become weapons for avoiding responsibility, shutting down conversations and negative emotions, and even manipulating others. So something strange happened as these concepts spread from therapists' offices to TikTok videos and Instagram. The nuanced, carefully defined terms used by mental health professionals began to lose their precision. They became catch-all explanations for any uncomfortable feeling or interpersonal conflict. What was originally supposed to spread the awareness actually had an interesting effect. It made it harder to recognize what real symptoms were. The core of this issue lies in the oversimplification and misunderstandings of complex ideas. Therapy is a process of introspection and accountability, designed to help individuals understand their own role in their lives and relationships. The goal is to move from a state of being wounded to a place of healing and empowerment. The purpose of initially alleviating blame was meant to help the patient stop blaming themselves with self-hatred and guilt for external circumstances, before learning how to deal with the mental damage in the long term. However, when therapeutic language is stripped of its clinical context and thrown into the public square, it can be misapplied to frame any negative experience as an act of victimization. A simple disagreement is no longer just a difference of opinion. It's an act of gaslighting. A friend who doesn't immediately agree with you isn't just being a friend, they're invalidating your feelings and therefore a bad friend. This creates a narrative where you are always the passive recipient of harm, and others are always the aggressors unless they conform to your worldview. Think about the word trauma. In clinical settings, or when I learned it in university, trauma refers to specific experiences that overwhelm a person's ability to cope, often involving actual or threatened death, serious injury, or sexual violence. But in popular usage, trauma has expanded to include virtually any negative experience or intense feelings of negativity. Being criticized by a teacher, having parents who are sometimes inconsistent, or experiencing social rejection can all be labeled as traumatic now. This isn't to minimize these experiences. They can certainly be painful and formative. But the problem is, by using the same word for both survivors of assault and people who had strict parents who yelled at them, we've diluted the term's meaning and created a hierarchy where everyone is competing to have the most traumatic experience in order to claim victimhood. The abundance of short-form content allowed anyone to post their negative experiences online, allowing groups of people to find relatable stories. But this also fed into more misdiagnoses. Anyone who had an ounce of selfishness, which is perfectly normal, becomes a narcissist, and anyone who has a bad memory is labeled a gaslighter. These terms obviously have extremely negative connotations and isn't helpful at all if instead of solving the problem at hand, one immediately jumps to labeling someone this term or that term. Although these warning stories may have helped some people avoid genuinely toxic people, it has at the same time left many people terrified of dating or other people because they are constantly looking out for signs of toxicity, meaning people are never allowed to show these signs, or they will be labeled one thing or another when meeting someone new, subtly forcing people to become more and more performative and less authentic because everyone is afraid of being judged the wrong way. This perspective, while seemingly protective, can be deeply disempowering. If every challenge is framed as a personal attack, we lose the opportunity to build emotional resilience. Life is full of friction and disappointment, and the ability to navigate it without a constant sense of being victimized is key to emotional maturity. The victimhood mindset, however, encourages us to see ourselves as fragile, to believe that our well-being is entirely dependent on the actions of others. It helps to understand and put things into perspective sometimes. However, how one chooses to move on and process it also allows us to live better and meaningful lives in the future. It teaches us to constantly look for external blame and find fault in others, which prevents us from examining our own contributions to a situation or learning from our mistakes. Therapeutic language is now regularly used to end discussions rather than facilitate them. Instead of engaging with criticism, someone might say, "That's triggering me," or "You're being toxic." While these responses might sometimes be valid, they're also increasingly used to avoid uncomfortable conversations or accountability. It allows us an escape door where we find fault in whatever the other person is saying, even if it comes from a good place. For example, it can be true that your partner or a friend is triggering anxiety when they critique something about you, but it may come from a good place. There is a difference between constructive feedback versus genuine animosity, and now the line is blurred more than ever when it's easier to just default to shutting down if someone disagrees with you. When every boundary becomes non-negotiable and every request becomes manipulation, relationships become impossible to navigate. Partners walk on eggshells, afraid that any disagreement will be labeled as abuse or toxicity, and this leads to barriers of communication. It shouldn't be the case where someone needs to carefully wade through and select curated words completely to avoid an argument. Mutual respect occurs in both directions, and feedback should be facilitated and appreciated between people. When everyday problems are described using clinical language, it becomes harder to distinguish between people who need professional help and those who are having normal human experiences. This can both overwhelm mental health services and prevent people from developing resilience for ordinary challenges. This creates a paradox. By trying to protect people from all psychological discomfort, we've made them less capable of handling the inevitable difficulties of life. College counselors report seeing students who describe normal academic stress as trauma, or who can't handle receiving constructive feedback without claiming emotional harm. Resilience, the ability to bounce back from setbacks, isn't built by avoiding all challenges. It's developed by facing difficulties and learning to cope with them. When we pathologize normal struggles, we rob people of opportunities to build this crucial skill. So the damage has been done. People are both aware and unaware of the complexities of mental health and how to deal with it with misinformation more popular than ever before. What can be done about this? Well, for one, it helps to be better informed what the actual definitions are. It's difficult when these terms were originally put out there. You weren't supposed to stop at just labeling yourself as a victim. You were supposed to be working with a trained professional to actually learn how to deal with these triggers through processes such as CBT so that they would no longer be as painful and you could live a more normal life. But instead, people are left with knowledge but no real solution. And therapy is an expensive choice that not everyone can afford. This channel aims to make this knowledge free and easy to understand for the public, which is a start. The reality is, all these labels have done a lot of harm, and a lot of the suggestions out there is to simply cut off anyone that is triggering you or displays these negative traits. One of the biggest mindset shifts out there really is to find better acceptance in people. Realize that many people are flawed, and you can't expect everyone to have dealt with all their trauma and be able to communicate with 100% respect and grace every time. It may be difficult to adjust to, but it also paints a better expectation of people. It requires a healthy blend of resilience and awareness to acknowledge others' boundaries and our own, while still being respectful about it. The rise of mental health awareness has been overwhelmingly positive for society. It's saved lives, improved relationships, and helped countless people understand and address their psychological struggles. The goal isn't to return to the days when mental health was stigmatized and people suffered in silence. Instead, we need to mature in how we use these concepts. We can maintain compassion and validation, while also encouraging resilience and accountability. We can take mental health seriously without pathologizing every aspect of human experience.